Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'd like to welcome you all to this debate. And we'll go straight to the points because we're running a bit late. Before the first round, I'll just ask my guests to briefly introduce themselves, like who they are and what they do. And maybe you should start with Mr. Matthew.
Hi. Is it on? Can you hear me? Yes. My name's Matthew. My mother was Daphne Caruana Galizia. She was a journalist in Malta, where I'm from, for over 30 years. I also spent some years working in journalism. And in the last years of my mother's life, we were working together on an investigation into high-level corruption in Malta around an energy deal in the country. And she was murdered with a car bomb during the course of that investigation in October 2017. Ever since then, together with other members of my family, I have two brothers, we've been campaigning for justice. Our campaign led to the resignation of the Prime Minister in January of last year. Multiple people are being prosecuted for my mother's murder, including the hitman, people who supplied the bomb, the person who commissioned the murder. And our campaign continues to ensure that there is full justice for the murder, but also for the people who my mother was investigating. Part of this campaign includes efforts to make sure that attacks against journalists are less frequent, and that hopefully we will no longer see the murders of any more journalists, although we're a long way off from this.
Thank you. Maja?
My name is Maja Sever. I'm journalist, reporter. I work in public service, Croatian radio, television in Croatia, in Zagreb. I'm a reporter almost 30 years. All my life I'm on Croatian television. But I'm also president of a trade union of Croatian journalists, and I'm very active in association. And I think that's it for start.
Thank you. And last but not least, Primož.
Hi, everybody. My name is Primož Cirman. I am an editor and journalist of Slovenian investigative news outlet necenzurjeno.se. I'm also vice president of Slovenian Association of Journalists, and I've been working in this profession for more than 20 years now.
Well, thank you. One of the reasons why we're here is, well, not a very nice reason, because our work is getting more and more dangerous, because only in this last year, two of our colleagues were killed. First in July, a Dutch journalist, Peter R. de Vries, who was specialized in organized crime, was shot in Amsterdam. In April, his Greek colleague was also shot in Athens. Then, of course, we all know the story about Mr. Jan Kuciak and his girlfriend, who were also shot in Slovakia, in Bratislava. And of course, unfortunately, your mother was also killed for this reason. And all of those journalists were either covering organized crime or corruption, or the connections between powerful political elites or powerful economic elites or business elites. And as you mentioned, some of the lower level criminals were prosecuted, but high level suspects haven't been yet prosecuted or anything. And unfortunately, those are not the only examples, because according to different sources, like 3 more journalists have been killed in the last couple of years, and the work's becoming more and more dangerous. But one thing that you also said is that things like that do not happen overnight. And violence is only a final step of a cascade of what can happen to a journalist. So what do you mean by that? What kind of cascade leads to violence?
Well, it really depends on the determination of journalists as well as the determination of people they're investigating. When my mother was investigating people in government, they tried many means to shut her up. This included tax investigations, attempts to buy her newspaper, to shut it down and fire her, defamation suits filed against her, 46 in total at the time of her murder that were active. And going after her family, I mean, trying to intimidate me and my brother, for example. This didn't work because my mother was so determined. So, of course, the next step for the people who wanted to stop her, you can call it the nuclear option, was to murder her. And we see this in case after case of journalists who are murdered for covering corruption. That first they're harassed and there are attempts to intimidate them. Nowadays it's become very common to sue them for defamation. You end up with single journalists who are fighting off 10, 20, 30, 40 defamation cases. This is becoming increasingly common.
Primož, you probably have quite a lot to say on this subject, because you are now, well, being tried on almost like every possible this step of the way, from threats to well, reading about yourselves almost every day in propaganda outlets, and of course you also have quite a lot of lawsuits to deal with. So can you tell us a bit more about how is it done in Slovenia?
Well, the techniques of pressure against journalists in Slovenia have changed a lot in the last 5 years. The maneuvers that are used against journalists are now more sophisticated. For instance, according to my experience, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, there was, of course, pressure on journalists because journalism is associated to pressure. But it was in a very mild form. We had prime ministers who phoned directly into the office and they were screaming that something was wrong with the article. We had lobbies that met on lunches with editors and explained to them that these journalists should be fired. We had these huge corporations that virtually banned writing about their CEOs. And they have threatened that they will pull out ads from newspapers or television channels. But of course, these are all, I would say, part of the job. These are the pressures that someone can get used to it. Those were the times that it was possible to work in Slovenian media relatively, how should I put it?
Safely?
Safely, yes. That's the word, safely. Because if you had a will to be persistent in your investigation, and if you had an editor that had a backbone, which is quite not quite a common sight in Slovenian media, unfortunately, that meant that you had all the freedom in the world to write virtually anything you like to. But in the last few years, the situation deteriorated gravely. I can speak from my experience, but also from experience of many of my colleagues. Last year, 39 lawsuits were filed against our media, against 3 journalists of our media for defamation. All were filed by one man. It's Mr. Rok Snežić, who is a friend and advisor of our Prime Minister. The reason was the story that we ran now for almost 4 years, the story about the hidden financing of the now ruling Slovenian Democratic Party, and in which Mr. Snežić was involved through his shady business dealings in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We probably heard about it. But my point is that these lawsuits did not come alone. They came in the package with smear campaign in propaganda outlets that are closed or owned by government parties. not only that you're smeared all the time, that you're target of insults. I have no problem with that, but the new method is that they basically want to criminalize you, so that people around you would start asking questions. What are you doing? You should not be doing that. They put this pressure into your family. So basically, you talk to a member of your family. The question is not that the guy you're writing about should be somewhere else than here, or that this is preposterous that the taxpayer money is spent in the way that it is. No, basically the topic of conversation is: are you sure you're okay with what you're doing? I mean, you shouldn't be doing something else because it's better for you. So this is basically the years of smear campaigns and propaganda articles and capital pressures. For instance, I can tell you a fresh example. 2 weeks ago, we have now ad campaigns of Generali on our website, and one person formerly employed at Nova TV, the propaganda portal of SDS, tweeted that I am the customer of Generali, and it's no way acceptable for me that this ad of Generali is on this website. I will quit. I will terminate my contract with them. I will leave them. And Prime Minister retweeted this. So basically, they not only want to destroy the media or personality journalists, they want to economically put you out of the job. They want not only to kill the story, they want to kill the media, and they do not hide it at all. So basically, I think this is now the turning point in Slovenian media that, should I call it Rubicon, and we stepped over it. And now if we don't step back, I'm afraid that in years to come, we won't be able to talk about free journalism in Slovenia because it would not be possible. Because what will happen? Because they will see example of a media 1, 2, 3 get destroyed. They see journalists getting smeared. So the self-censorship command will be
Stronger.
And of course, the other journalists will see that if we dig, what will happen to them? So I think this is the real danger that is present now, not only, of course, in our small niche media, but I also see that on the national television, on Slovenian press agency and other Slovenian media. I think this is now the turning point. This is now the challenge we all have to face and address it as a profession.
Maybe 10 years ago, when I was visiting this journalism festival in Perugia, we all kind of felt awed when we talked to Italian colleagues that how many journalists have to live under police protection because they covered organized crime. They still do. But at that time, it was like the criminals who were threatening the journalists, and then the police and the law enforcement tried to protect them if necessary. But Maja said that now, in our debate, we said before we started this debate, Maja mentioned that it's now totally different. And as Primož also said, it's not the criminals who are threatening you, but now it's pretty much like everybody from the companies to the head of state. So how do you feel this kind of environment? Because you also said that in Croatia, those kind of lawsuits are very popular.
Yes, unfortunately, Croatia is a leader with lawsuits in not just this region, I think in Europe probably. Well, the flood of slap suits in Croatia began several years ago. And unfortunately, I have to say now that my house, Croatia Radio Television, was a leader in this process, lawsuits against journalists. At one point, Croatian Radio Television conducted 36 slap suits against media outlets and journalists in Warriors Media, but also against its own journalists. My colleague Sanja Miklaušević-Pavić and Hrvoje Zovko was also active in association. He is also president of associations, and he still he still have these lawsuits against him from Croatian television. But after we, and when I said we, I mean a union and association, protested, we sent mail and information on all levels in European Union. Even European Parliament has had a debate about slap suits, and our president of Association Zovko was on this meeting in Brussels. And after, let's say, 6 or 7 months, there were session in Parliament about slap suits against journalists, and our manager was there. But yes, of course, by the law, Parliament could not say to management of Croatian television what to do. But they had some conclusions that it's not they expect that Croatian television won't suit journalists, and then Croatian television reached an agreement with most of media, but there was still a few lawsuits against our colleagues. Then our ex-manager, I don't know if you know, our ex-general manager were arrested because he was arrested on suspicions of participation in some corruption scandals, more precisely of carrying a bag with money, 50,000 euros in a bag to favor a businessman, and he received an apartment in a center of city to return. Our general manager was in a jail, like investigation jail, like 4 months, and after 4 months they didn't quit them, but he was moved from general manager place. And this new general manager also had agreement with my colleagues, and only Zovko now had a lawsuit. But that's not the end of the problem, because at this moment there is 924 slap suits against journalists in Croatia, and that's some kind of system. Not only politicians. For example, I don't know if you know, our deputy president, vice president of parliament, Miljan Brkić, from right wing, at one point had around 40 lawsuits against journalists in all media. 40 times he was on a court with pain and less sleepless, because of articles. Our ex-Minister of Agriculture, he has, I don't know how many suits, and he always lose, but he still sued journalists. Now he's not anymore Minister of Agriculture. Even judges sued journalists in Croatia. That's some kind of system. And as Primož said, it's has very bad influence on our work, because, as media is smaller, this pressure is harder. Because, for example, we have the new example. One businessman from Šibenik. Šibenik is on the coast region in our coast. Suited 4 websites, 4 media outlets for 800. Just a moment. That's the reason I have paper. I think 800,000 euros. Yes. From 4 media outlets, and 3 of them are very small medias in this region. If they lose, they can close this media, this newspaper. So yes, it is very big problem in Croatia, but there is no political will to solve this problem. Because, you know, just one word.
To change, yeah.
Yeah. We just demand to change a criminal law, because defamation is still in the criminal law, and we wanted to replace it in a lower level. Our government, Ministry of Culture, start debating some kind of work group for slap suits, and they recognize the problem, and they talk about needs for education for judges, because they don't know how to solve these slap suits. But that's all blah, 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 as Greta said. It's nothing concrete to solve this really, really big problem for our colleagues in Croatia.
Matthew, how much has changed after the event? Yeah, there have been some symbolic things, but how much the system has changed, if it has changed at all, after your mother died, as a consequence, in the sense of, are any of those major reasons why it's so hard to investigate corruption is now a bit more robust or not? Matthew?
I think that some things have changed over the past few years. The European Union created an authority called the EPPO, European Public Prosecutor's Office. Slovenia joined this and finally appointed its prosecutors,
Sort of.
after a very long and difficult process, let's say. But and this is kind of a good first step, because it gives independent prosecutors who have to answer to not the Slovenian government, not the Maltese government, but the chief prosecutor of the European Union. The grounds to prosecute crimes of money laundering, corruption, abuse of EU funds, anything that involves EU funds. But I think this remit needs to be expanded to include all crimes of high-level corruption that involve officials of EU member states, as well as that involve cross-border crimes such as money laundering. How have we arrived at this conclusion? The problems that we saw in Malta were what in some countries are called state capture, where a group of people involving criminals, business figures, politicians, take over government and then use that position in government to take over all organs of the state and exert control over all state officials. Once this happens, it becomes impossible for national authorities to prosecute members of that same group, even after journalists reveal evidence of really high-level corruption. So we need prosecutors, we need authorities that are independent of national authorities as much as possible, to act as a kind of fallback when state capture becomes a reality in EU member states.
Yeah, because we see more and more examples of state capture, because it's hard to describe what's happening in the region as any kind of democratic process. I mean, yeah, sure, you do have elections, you have the officials, you have the institutions, but if they're captured by some elites, then nobody actually can do much of a thing. So maybe, and Malta and also Slovenia, they're kind of very small societies. So how do you actually do anything, or as a journalist, how do you cover corruption in such a society when you have state capture and you know that, well, almost like everybody knows everybody?
The same as you would in any other society. I mean, being a small or big society should not change the way that you as a journalist cover corruption. Of course, this is the only people who use being part of a small society as an excuse for anything are the very people whom we're investigating, who say, oh, you know, it's normal for politicians to have business deals with business figures because this is a small society. It's normal for me as Minister of Justice to put my daughter in charge of the prosecutor's office, for example, because this is normal in a small society. Everyone has to work, so we have to do that, you know. But of course, this is not normal, and no one should accept it as being normal. Journalists should not change the way they report. Suddenly, the standards are lowered, or the bar is lowered, just because of the size of our societies.
Primož, I mean, everything, that's true on a systemic level, but everything does get more personal in many ways.
Maybe, but if we go back to your previous question, what has changed after the tragic event on Malta? You can't analyze this without seeing what happens in Europe on a broader level. What you have now is EU of two parts. In one part, there is still, let's put it, hardcore of EU that basically still wants to maybe keep this union somehow together on a set of values that were determined in the 50s. And one of these values is also freedom of the press, which should, in my opinion, be one of the pillars of the European Union. And on the other side, you have this trend of illiberal democracies, which prevailed in Hungary and Poland, is now on a very strong scale coming to Slovenia. So basically now we have 3, 4, maybe 5 European countries that this trend is very strong. You have basically the whole eastern part of EU that has very worrying trends of deteriorating press freedom, and the pressure on journalists is growing there. You have a media mogul that was prime minister in one of these countries till 1 week ago. So this is not only the battle on the field of media. This is the battle for political soul of Europe, which goes through the media. And what is unfortunately happening is that the bad guys are winning. Because why? Because the European Union has not found any political will to seriously sanction deviations or attacks that went towards the media. You had a Hungary, which was once a decent European Union state, which basically today does not have any independent media at all. Maybe a few online portals and virtually no newspapers. We have Poland, where you have a newspaper that is a target of 50 lawsuits filed by government. You have Slovenia, you have Croatia, and I think that this eastern part of EU is importing a model that was once seen in states such as Russia, Turkey, Egypt, and Serbia. And this model is now prevailing in these countries. The methods are the same. The actions of politicians there are the same. The brutality is almost the same. The attitude toward journalists is the same. This is the world in which journalists are enemies of the state. This is the world in which journalists, as you hear in Slovenia, they spread diseases. They're not only some weapon of hidden mafia state or the deep state, which is a term that originates from Erdogan's Turkey. They are spreaders of the disease. And that's it. That's enough. So in the name of health of the society, it is better that journalists do not exist at all. Or as the current government in Slovenia sees journalists, they should, as MP Alenka Jeraj of SDS wrote several days ago, they should report on government activities regarding EU presidency. And that's it.
Sure, but I mean, we've been having this debate for quite a long time. For example, if you remember Berlusconi, he was kind of, in many sense, of course, it's not the same, but he was very innovative when it comes to what you can do with your media space within the EU, and nobody reacted. And then the EU has no media directive, is very reluctant to make any kind of media legislations. And when we, especially from our region, when we address this problem, we put a lot of hopes to the European Union on what it can do. Any comments on that? Do you still feel?
Well, the EU has
optimistic?
changed.
Sure.
The EU we watched in the 90s is not the same EU that exists now. The turning point, in my opinion, was the financial crisis of 2010-2011 period, where basically we have seen that the very narrow interest of European banks, and especially two biggest countries there, Germany and France, prevailed over the interest of EU. So basically you had a division on European North and European South back then. And these were the wounds that no Mitsotaki's garment can heal, not anyone. This was imprinted into the minds of EU people. So basically now what we saw with Orban was just the exploration of this sentiment. And of course the trigger was migrant crisis. And that's it. And the media are not some separate ecosystem that should be analyzed separately. No, media are only the part of the whole scale. So basically, the migrant crisis was the trigger for to present to Orban, to present himself as the guardian of Christianity. And of course, independent critical media do not fall into that narrative.
Yes, but I have to say that we always we have a hope, always hope from Europe. Europe will help us, Brussels will help us, and in Croatia we also hope that our Prime Minister wants to continue his political career in Brussels, and that the reason he will listening what Brussels said, but. Maybe we have some use from for our laws and regulations, but on the field there is no any real protect of journalism and media at all. You know, it's I'm afraid that at that moment it's just hope. And me as president of Union, I used to use these tools, and I write to Brussels and European Federation and rule of law, but it's a very, very small steps. Like, okay, we will start with this working group of slap suits, or yes, we will support founding the Council of Media, but that's only steps on the paper. There is no real political will, and there is no real efforts for protect journalism, independent journalism. For example, in Croatia, are all regulatory bodies of in media are not independent. Everything is elected by political majority in Croatia. General manager of public service Croatian television has to be elected in of political majority in parliament. A general manager of public agency, chief of agency for electronic media. It's a only regulatory body in Croatia. He's also elected with political majority in parliament. There is no independence on any level of public media in Croatia, and I don't know what we can expect with this. And this is regulation with I want to say kao sa evropskim zakonima je it's from European
Harmonized.
Harmonized with European legislation. So there is no, okay, yes.
We had a great example in Slovenia, Slovenian press agency. You probably heard about it. The intention was clear to destroy it. So basically, not only to take over the agency, but to destroy it. So there was a strong push of civil society in Slovenia. There was a strong push of many journalistic associations in Europe there was also, you could be said, a very strong diplomatic push, but it's still, if there wasn't for resilience of the people working in SDA, the consistency of team of few people in Journalistic Association of Slovenia, and the will of people to donate money for wages of journalists, Slovenian press agency would be history today.
Without that.
Without doubt. Because why? And even in the middle of EU presidency, the diplomatic pressure was not sufficient enough. It basically had to come to the Slovenian court, where the government would ultimately lose.
Yeah.
So basically, now they drag this into the 2022, where no doubt they will try this again. But so if this can happen in a country that presides EU, then of course it can happen anytime, anywhere. And this is my point: is that there is no systemic solution for this kind of problems in the EU today. For instance, if you're a country that violates budget rules, you will be punished. If you violate it long enough, you violate it harsh enough, you'll get troika. So, but if you violate media freedom, if you threat journalists, if you destroy media, if you run campaign against the critical press, you're not punished as a new government or EU country. You're not.
You're not even slapped.
You're not even slapped. Yes. So basically, you'll get your baby fall of on the scale of media freedom. You'll be mentioned in some reports. There'll be some expressing concerns from maybe senior EU politicians, but that's it. There is no mechanism that can prevent this. And if media freedom is one of the pillars of EU, then this mechanism should exist. And that's it. That's the only debate we should have on the EU level. Because why? Because the things have turned systemic. Now you don't have only Hungary, you don't have only Poland, you have Slovenia, you have Croatia, you have almost quarter of members now that are where media, press, and press freedom is seriously under threat.
But you also mentioned one thing that's, I think, different than it used to be, because even maybe 10 years ago, the local autocrats or politicians in general, they would consider that when they come to power, they would try to take over the media. And they would start with public media and then maybe use some other means to control private media. Now, it's about, as you said, SDA was not about taking over, but it was destroying. Why? Because those people also built parallel media system. And the effect is also that it creates a great divide between journalists themselves. That's one of the steps. For example, in Hungary, that was the idea. There is no, and it was almost like a slogan. There is no journalism. There are no journalists. There are only left activists or right activists. No journalism. That was the idea. Destroy the profession, destroy the idea of credibility. And it also became systemic. But, was it also the case in Malta? Because one of the things that I think that Roberto Saviano, an Italian journalist, once wrote, that the most, the worst thing that happened to a journalist is that you're being kind of blacklisted or almost like outcasted by your own people. That nobody supports you, or you're not seen anymore, that you have to basically either start blogging or create your own media or something to actually still keep the voice. Was it also the case in Malta? Because
I mean, with my mother, it was the case that that she was isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, this relates to something I want to say, because I've been in the Balkans for about a week. Last week I was in Albania, and this weekend I was in Montenegro, and I have to fight very hard not to get depressed because all the conversations are very depressing. Mm-hmm. But the same thing, I always say the same thing in every place. Look, there is really, because in Montenegro, journalists there told me, we're from the Balkans, you don't understand, we're very cynical, and I'm not as optimistic as you, and so on. But I mean, the way I look at it is that the situation was quite bad in Malta. With my mother being completely isolated, we had about 30 journalists in the entire country in total. My mother was only one of only about 3 or 4 who were doing any investigative journalism. The country was in a complete mess. But by kind of organizing ourselves and fighting this multifaceted campaign, we were able to start changing things. And from my meetings with journalists in different countries here in the Balkans, I see a lot more solidarity than I did, than I still do even in my own country, in Malta. I mean, it was possible for journalists to come around the table voluntarily as a kind of support group to talk about the issues they're facing. So I think once there is common agreement, at least not between, it doesn't need to be between all journalists, but between a group of a significant size, let's say. And a significant size means a number even as small as 10 or 20. That's enough. Then it is possible to organize and take action to change the situation. So if, remember that member states of the European Union or member states of the Council of Europe have a positive obligation, that means that it is their duty to create a free environment for journalists, a free environment for expression. And obviously this means that not attacking journalists is not enough. They have to go beyond that and actually protect the journalists from attacks. So currently, all countries in Europe that are not creating this positive environment are responsible for committing a human rights violation. If we can get journalists in different countries to organize themselves and to fight back against these violations using the law, then we're going to take many, many small steps forward that will send a strong message and also change the situation for us. Because no European government wants to be in direct conflict with the Council of Europe, in direct conflict with the European Union. They're going to try for as long as possible, but it's going to hurt them. And if we can use the law to get judgments, for example, from constitutional courts or from the European Court of Human Rights, that our countries are violating our rights, then we're going to make a lot of these tiny steps forward. We're going to make it difficult for our governments to continue violating our rights. I mean, this way of fighting back between using the law has been really important for us in Malta. And I think it's going to be as important for journalists in other European countries too.
I think that you're also right, because it used to be almost like a cliche that journalists around here are pretty cynical, and then because systems are bad and all the environment is terrible, that people would leave the profession, maybe go to PR departments or do something else. As Primož would say, that they would listen to very benevolent advices from your environment and start doing something else. But what we see now is it's not happening. I mean, more and more people who actually leave maybe some big media outlets start their own media outlets. And maybe a question for both you, Maja and Primož, because you come from a very different, let's say, media organizations, what can be done and what would you expect or hope that could change in such a big system as the national public broadcaster in order to get things better? And to you, what would the tiny media outlet who tries to do investigation and also survive need in order to do what you want to do?
Well, I have to say that I really don't know answer on your question because because the problem with the public media and the big broadcaster is not problem just in Croatia, it's problem in all Europe. But what I can say that I believe in public service, and I believe that we have to fight for public service because it's a very important point of all societies. For example, in Croatia, it's probably the only the media who can have some independence because people pay us, because we have a fee. We are not good television. We don't have good program. We don't have even journalists who have time and freedom for be investigative journalists. But we have to fight because today we spoke about agency, private media houses are in worse position that our public services, and small media outlets also are under attack of slap suits if they are really independent and write serious articles in journalism. And we have last few years problem with the funds. We had, for example, we had really serious money from Europe, like 30 million kunas. It's approximately few millions of euro, and our ministry, because yes, 30 millions.
Four.
Few.
Okay.
Yeah. What I want to say that the decision of ex-government, right-wing government, was to don't raise those money to the small non-profit media. It was political decision, and on all levels there is specific problems with the media. But as Matthew said, I'm not pessimistic. I'm optimistic, and I believe in solidarity. So I want to say something. But I really believe that with cooperation, with solidarity, with fight, with this panel here, it's also some kind of solidarity, and I hope that will show that what I really believe, that journalism is really public good, and it's very important for every environment, and it's very important for every society. So I believe that few of us in Croatian television can make some changes. I still believe, and we can prove that public service is important and will survive. So I don't know how, but I really will continue this fight.
Yeah, and of course, and how to keep or get the trust back for our profession. That's another thing. That's why I mentioned Hungary,
Yes,
because trust is first line of attack.
Yes, I think the most important thing for a public service and for my public service in Croatia is to start with journalism and start to support quality professional investigative journalism on Croatian television. And unfortunately, this decision is not in my hand. It's in there has to be even political will for this, and I think that should be first and very important step, to give real journalists to make real journalism on Croatian television. And all the other things will be easier then. And now it's not the situation.
Regarding trust, work is an answer.
Sure. Consistency.
You saw that during the epidemic when the trust in our public broadcaster rose huge. I think for 21% or something like that. It was one of the top 3 gain makers in this regard. Well, this was before the vaccine skepticism, and that's not, but in the first year of epidemic.
The first year, yeah.
So the question was what the small media need, niche media need. But basically, just to I would say 2 things: leave us alone and fair ad market. Yeah. That's it. And which is very hard in the small countries, of course, because Slovene language is spoken only by 2 million people, and of course we have to compete in that on that small scale. Of course, we can also write in English, but that means that the importance of media for the development Slovenian language is diminished. So it's a two-way trap. But otherwise, I think that the key is strong public broadcaster for media system in every country, especially in Slovenia, where it is very hard to basically found new media with some private initiative because of a small market and very let's say very the ad market that is not fair in a way in many senses, but okay.
But
so
even on a fair advertising market, it would be hard.
Yes, because you saw during the transition
Sure.
that the private initiative from abroad basically almost did not come except 2 or 3 media. But I think that as Maja said, public broadcaster is the key to any media ecosystem in each country, and public broadcaster is the institution that should make creme de la creme products in journalism, and everyone else should follow. So basically, we the small media are only like some little mice in this ecosystem. We found a story and we chew on it, and that's it. That's 1, 2, 3 big stories, and that's it. And of course, then we hope that the big media will follow these stories and dig them on. But I think that's the key.
Sure.
We are only
A complement,
a small
not-
part of that, and
Not an alternative to the big players.
yes.
Maybe last question, because all that's now mentioned is that, and sometimes when we go too broad into some, I don't know, very international debates, we tend to forget that nobody will do journalism in our countries if we don't do it. That's a simple fact. You cannot outsource our work. You cannot outsource, let's say, local or national or whatever journalism to any outsider, or to I don't know, to big media association or whatever, because we see that we can be interesting for maybe,
There'll be robots.
but yeah, and it's really hard to actually do this kind of journalism locally if you don't have this infrastructure. So maybe if you try to summarize, you mentioned decriminalizing Defamation Act, for example, then some kind of European mechanism in order to actually force the new liberal democracy to follow at least something, and to be left alone and to actually be. Is it enough for a small step, or can we hope for anything more?
I was going to say a lot of mechanisms that we can use now already exist. It's just a matter of organizing ourselves to use them. I mean, we can ask institutions to create new laws and even to create new institutions and new mechanisms, but we need to organize ourselves to use them. And there is always the potential that mechanisms will be created to be used against us.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no kind of there is no magic institution that is going to allow us to kind of get home from work every day at 5 p.m. and, you know, have dinner in peace and quiet. I mean, that's not going to happen. We have to organize ourselves, journalists working with civil society, with lawyers, with parliamentarians, to change things, to use the mechanisms that exist. It's just really a matter of working together as members of civil society. Democracy isn't something like you can just sort of access it when you need it. It's just a way of being and a way of conducting your life. We need to kind of, I mean, we need to act together, you know, to reinforce its principles. no civil servant in the European Union is going to do that for us.
Yeah, I just say I agree with Matthew. We have to fight together and to defend and to fight for better.
Yeah, and not to leave the government to do this divide and.
Yeah.
Of course, an anti-SLAPP directive from EU would help. For instance, in Sweden, if someone files, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 lawsuits against one people, the court can reject it because if it rules that these lawsuits are against public interests that are filed with an intent to financially drain or silence the weaker side, that means they're not taken into consideration. So what the Swedish journalists have a problem now that if there's one case of one media portal there that one Swedish businessman, Swedish oligarch, they have oligarch in Sweden too, filed several lawsuits against him, and the Swedish court rejected it, and he filed them in London and Monaco. Because his business ventures are also there. So if there would be an anti-SLAPP directive that should have to be harmonized with the national laws, it would be a lot easier for anyone. Of course, also defamation laws in Slovenia are also very strict, as in Croatia. This is still the main reason that our position on the press of the scale of media freedom is not as high as it should be. For instance, in previous years, okay, I'm not talking about the last year or two, but of course, as Matthew said, that the Balkan is always full of depression.
And
let's conclude that I think that some things have turned bright in Slovenia. I would say I'm very proud of my colleagues in Slovenian press agency, in national broadcaster, in biggest commercial television, and any other print and other media that have basically that have recognized what is at stake and have shown a very, very strong amount of solidarity towards colleagues. I think that maybe for the first time in Slovenian journalism, at least in 21st century, there's a huge solidarity. I think that we as a journalist, we were in a little bit of comfort zone. Some things were taken for granted, and now that we have seen that they're not, I think we stepped together and showed a very strong degree of mutual help, and I think this is the foundation that we all should build on. I think these are the times that we all will never forget. These are the times that are taking very, very high personal, let's put it, tax against cost against all of us, and these are draining times. These are times we have to fight for what we are, not what we do, for what we are. And I think that even when the government changes, I think that this spirit will somehow remain. And I think that we as a community, as much as it can sound weird what I'm about to say, we will be stronger as a community.
I certainly hope so, because
I hope once again this is the foundation that we should build on in future for the well-being of our profession.
Yeah, I certainly hope so, because this sense of urgency has a strong, mobilizing force, but it's really hard to sustain. So when the pressure will be, a little bit lower, I hope that we will not just forget about this and say, well, those were just, a couple of bad years.
I think it will not be lower because what we see in Slovenia is that when the next government comes, basically they not change things that were in the past. They like to sit in the chair and keep it quietly. So I think the pressure this will not happen again, that the pressure will rise, because we have learned how to speak, we have learned how to be heard. We have learned with the STA and the public broadcaster that we are stronger together. It's maybe absurd, but we did not know it then, because journalism was very individualized in Slovenia. Maybe there was not sense that the association and the union are the institutions we need. But I think this has changed now.
Thank God it's changed.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear
Hail,
that.
hail.
Bravo. Nice.
That's
Oh,
it's a terrible situation to be in when.
Okay,
As you see.
so we can also open this floor to the questions if you have any.
A moram dati malo dol? A je v redu? V redu. Ciao. Aha, in English, okay. If we understand journalism as a public good, as Maja said, or public service that we do for the public, by the public, with the public. So are there any solutions that journalists can let's say, find with the public? So what happened to the relation between journalists and the public?
As I understand, you in Slovenia on public broadcast and in agency have a support of public, and it's a very good and a nice sign. It's a very encouraging sign. So I think that you in Slovenia and journalists in Slovenia are a good example. And after this, what Primož said, it's really give us also hope. And I think that the situation here shows our connections with the public, because probably you have support because you really serve to citizens and to public. I think so.
Well, basically, we did it with the STA. As I said before, STA would not survive without the support of public virtually, because it's public donated money for wages of journalists working there. With regards that journalism is public good, of course, we should all consider that we should also ask a question: is it possible to have a quality independent investigative journalism in Slovenia without some sort of state help? Of course, I'm now running into my own trap now, because if you write against government, you can't expect to be financed by the government. That's, of course, that's logical. But still, can you separate government and state in this point? So basically, and I think this is the question we should be asking more and more, because we see now that this media financing that goes through the Ministry of Culture is a farce that can be brutally used for political rewarding of friends. And I think we should change that system, but don't ask me how.
Yeah, but okay. But I just want to say that this is another very, very important question on financing media. And I think that, as Primož said, we have to find a new mechanism, new way to finance media. I think into directions of some kind of public funds, but some different mechanism that we and you in Slovenia have. But yes, as Primož, I also don't know the answer now, but that's the tasks for us in union and association and with the colleagues, journalists, to try to find some ideas, some new mechanism how to finance independence journalism for independence in journalism.
I feel like the only idiot in the classroom who didn't understand the question. Is it that because journalism is a public good, it should be financed publicly, right? Is this the question?
Journalists and the public.
Okay, I think there's room for both, because it's inevitable that public financing is going to undermine your work. This is inevitable. Taking money from a government, taking money from a state is going to be used to undermine your work, whether you like it or not. You can protest about it as much as you want. But there are always going to be people who are going to say that you're publishing X, Y, or Z because you're financed by a state, whatever state it is. So I think there's room for both. There has to be media that is state financed. I believe in there being a good quality public broadcaster, but I also believe that there should be media that is privately owned and privately financed by donors, by businesses, that the publication itself has a business model, or that it is financed by donations from the public. There is no sort of one solution. I believe that there has to be everything, and we have to have as many different models as possible in any market. Public financing, public donations, private business, media organizations with their own business model. There has to be a mix of everything, I think. Or rather, we should aim for there to be a mix of everything.
Recently, I had a chance to meet in Slovenia a diplomat from Malta. And when I talked to Macedonian journalists visiting us about problem of political party ownership of television, broadcasting media, which is forbidden in many EU member states, for political parties to own broadcast media. And then I mentioned our case and problem that our ruling party is involved in such media production. And then the Malta diplomat said, but we have in Malta also, and it's not illegal. Obviously, it's not illegal. It depends from country to country. On EU level, it's not regulated. But what is your experience, Matthew, about political party-owned media in Malta? Has this is a problem in your country?
So even though I come from the most extreme situation possible, which is that we have two big political parties, one in government and one in opposition, and each political party owns a TV station, two newspapers, radio stations, multiple websites, social media accounts. I mean, they have every different kind of media possible. I do not believe that it should be made illegal for political parties to own media. I think that this is a violation of human rights. Any person, any organization, even if it's a political party, should be allowed to own, operate, or control a media organization. I think this is a really important right to have, because in an extreme situation where you have a political party in government that shuts down all independent media, and the only organization that can afford to create its own media is a political party, then that political party has to be able and has to be allowed to set up a media organization. And I do not want to have a situation where a state can shut down media organizations with the argument that they are controlled by political parties or that they are partisan. I think this is too authoritarian for my liking. And I do not agree at all that political parties should be banned from owning media. But I do think that political parties in my own country, in any other country, out of their own will, should realize that having partisan media harms democracy. And they should kind of put down their weapons out of their own free will, and not because they are forced to do so using the law. I really believe in that. I mean, there are other tools that can be used to make sure that media is not overly partisan. For example, in my country, we have a regulator that is supposed to ensure that public broadcasting, whether it's by political party-owned media, or whether it's by privately owned media, whether it's owned by the state, is impartial. What is the problem that we have? The regulator is not enforcing this law. That's our problem. Any more questions?
Or not? Well, if there's no more questions, then really...
Maybe I
one question
can ask
for
my- Okay.
maybe one question for Matthew.
Yes,
He mentioned
so
that he
do
was
I.
in Albania and Montenegro. So how are the problems there different from problems you encountered in Slovenia?
I think there are some similarities, mostly related to labor rights. So the problem that many journalists are facing in Albania is that they are paid very little, a few €100 a month. They work 6 days a week. There's extreme interference in their work by the shareholders of the media organizations they work for. Editors do not defend them. So the example you gave, which I'm very familiar with, of a politician calling up the newsroom and shouting at the journalists, their editors would not defend them from that, for example. So they feel like they have absolutely no one protecting them. They don't have the backing of the organizations they work for. They don't have the backing of the state, nothing. They're on their own. What has happened in this situation? A group of journalists who are the definition of people who are not empowered. So they're completely disenfranchised. They're not members of labor unions. They can't become members of labor unions even. They have come together as a group with the will to take some kind of action. So they want to set up a labor union. They want to use the law to fight mistreatment, for example. They want to do all of these things. But to me, the biggest inspiration I saw is that all of these journalists working for different media organizations that are competing with each other or getting together in the same room behind the backs of their bosses to kind of coordinate with each other and organize with each other. This to me is really inspiring.
Maja, you also...
Yes, I just want to ask Matthew, what is, I'm interested, what is your plans now for the future or your organization or?
I mean, I loved my job before all of this happened. I used to work for an organization called the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. I love working with technology. I love working with journalists. I really liked doing that. I felt like our investigations were really having an impact across the world, and we were empowering journalists to do their work. But to me, I mean, I hardly ever think about my plans for the future. I just have one goal, which is justice for my mother and justice for her investigations. And to me, that's the most important thing. What I do after that, I have no idea. I hardly ever think about it because everything is up in the air, you know. I don't know when we will be getting convictions. But I mean, it's the thing that I work for every day. I mean, it's really hard for me to answer that question. I just don't think about it. I don't really think about it.
Well, thank you all for coming here and joining this conversation. It's such a pleasant change to actually have a conversation live, but not only on screen, because I think we're all totally fed up with Zooms. And thank you to you all for coming here, because you're also a part of live event. So thank you all again. And we'll probably be available for some extra questions in backstage. So thank you for now. And
Thank you.